So let me continue, therefore, by examining these two social antitheses, not only that between rich and poor, but that between labor and leisure. Both antitheses carried a high imaginative voltage in the Christian communities of the Roman Empire of the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd centuries. Here we must begin, as always, with St. Paul. Written between 50 and 55 AD, Paul's letters are by far the earliest documents of Christianity, and they're notably concerned with money. In the words of Dieter Georgi in his challenging book, Remembering the Poor, the history of the Pauline collection for Jerusalem, I cite Georgi, the authentic writings of Paul contain some of the most elaborate literary reflections on the flow of money surviving from the ancient world. In Paul's letters, we catch him at work organizing a series of collections. Galatians 2, 1-10, 1 Corinthians 16, 1-4, 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, Romans 15, 14-32. These collections were made for a group known in Romans 26 as the poor among the saints in Jerusalem. They had been instituted, according to Paul, in response to the demand of the Christian community in Jerusalem that they would have us remember the poor. Galatians 3:10. Furthermore, in other parts of his letters, Paul defended at great length his own behavior in alternately seeking and refusing financial support while he was teaching and traveling. 1 Corinthians 3, 3-18, 2 Corinthians 11, 7-12, 2 Thessalonians 3, 7-10. Altogether, Paul's letters give us an unexpected glimpse of a great fundraiser in action. Now, this aspect of the life and writings of Paul has been exhaustively studied of late. So let me step back a little from the nitty-gritty of Paul's collection for the saints and from his own complex attitude to receiving financial support from those to whom he ministered, to some of the wider factors that gave resonance to his writings, both at the time and in future ages. For in the case of Paul, we see the emergence of a dilemma, a collection made for the poor among the saints in response to the request of the leaders of the Church of Jerusalem that they would have us remember the poor, quickly escalated into a further discussion of what demands could be made on ordinary believers who worked for their living in order to support the activities of Paul and his helpers as organizers of such collections for the poor, as missionaries and as teachers. Discussion of alms for the many very quickly became a discussion also of financial support for the few. This wider dilemma would confront Christians. I don't think it's me. This wider dilemma, my cell phone is much more vulgar. This wider dilemma would confront Christians all over the Mediterranean throughout late antiquity. Thus, the problem the Christians faced was not only how to remember the poor, it was how to pay for their own religious leaders. Already in the 4th century AD, we can see the emergence of an ambivalence that would continue from this time throughout the Middle Ages up to the Reformation and indeed up to our own days. Who are the poor? Are they the economic poor, or are they rather the holy poor? And who are the holy poor? Do they include the religious leaders themselves, who as part of their duties looked after the economic poor? Last but not least, to what extent were those who gave up their time as teachers, as missionaries, and later as church officials, as bishops and clergy, thereby sacrificing their earning power or their ability to look after their properties? How much were they entitled to support as if they were members of the poor, indeed as if they were members of the poor par excellence? Now, in what remains of this lecture, and in the entire next lecture, I'll deal with the opening stages of what will prove to be a long and troubled story. Now, to begin with, we must remember that this dilemma was not unique to the early church. Rather, early Christians found themselves swept into a silent revolution, which already in the 1st and 2nd century ADs marked the beginning of the end of the ancient world. Put very briefly, the quickening of the tempo of religious life throughout the Mediterranean was accompanied by an unprecedented democratization of religious expertise and of religious leadership. In many sections of the Roman world, religion became a carrière ouverte aux talents. Persons of the lower and middling classes who found it difficult in ordinary times to support themselves in normal conditions entered with great gusto and in increasing numbers into the high enterprise of religion. As they were not persons of independent needs, they had to be supported by contributions from others. Hence a crisis which affected Judaism and many pagan cults quite as much as it affected the Christian churches. We should never forget in this respect how comfortably de haut en bas the traditional religious establishments of the ancient world had been. Religious speculation was usually regarded as the preserve of philosophers and of scribes who came from the wealthy classes. Their wealth gave them the leisure to engage in the elevating and time-consuming business of religion, for they were not held, as were the majority of their fellows, in the permafrost of ponos. Ponos, a Greek word of heavy with meaning that's probably best translated as drudgery. In the social common sense of ancient persons, ponos, drudgery, not poverty, was the true antithesis to wealth. One did not have to be poor to be subject to ponos. It was quite possible to be quite prosperous, but still obliged by circumstances to take time-consuming pains to increase or preserve one's wealth. But whether they were relatively rich or truly poor, those who'd not reached the point of take-off, as it were, from financial cares, had to resign themselves to being deprived of the privilege of the truly rich, which was freedom from toil. It was assumed that they could not join the company of the thoughtful. The taint of labor lay upon them. On this matter, the Hellenized Jewish author of the Wisdom of Ben Sirach, Ecclesiasticus, spoke for the intelligentsia of the Greco-Roman world as a whole. The wisdom of the learned man cometh by opportunity of leisure, and he that hath little business shall become wise. How can he get wisdom who holds the plough, that drives oxen and is occupied in their labours? The world of upper-class leisure, such as that praised by Ben Sira, is very much not what we meet among the early Christians. We catch a glimpse of the average representatives of Palestinian Christianity in a strange encounter that took place around 90 AD. Travelling through Palestine in the wake of the great Jewish revolt, the Emperor Domitian was told that the relatives of Jesus of Nazareth were still alive. Concerned that the family of a self-proclaimed Messiah and potential king of the Jews might still be dangerous, he summoned them to his tent. They turned out to be small farmers. They were by no means members of the landless poor. They were capable of supporting themselves and even a few servants on holdings of around 25 acres. But they were men of Ponos, and they could prove it. They showed the emperor their hands, bringing forward as proof of their toil the hardness of their bodies, the calluses inflicted on their hands by incessant labour. Domitian, despising them as beneath his notice, set them free. The emperor was reassured by what he saw. Such persons caught in drudgery could do him no harm. 1500 years later, William Shakespeare, in his Midsummer's Night's Dream, still reflected the mood of persons such as Ben Sira and the Emperor Domitian. The humble craftsmen of Theseus's Athens, assembled by Duke Theseus to produce a play, were presented as harmless and vaguely ludicrous persons. They were, in Shakespeare's words, hard-handed men, which never laboured in their minds till now. But in fact, the Emperor Domitian had glimpsed the future.